Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf because I like the idea of time travel, and pre-filming videos and releasing them much later feels like the equivalent of that. Like December 2020 me is travelling forward in time into your computer screens whenever you're watching this. I have no idea when this one's going up. Today I want to talk about two books from Samaya Dowd, one of which I own, the other one of which I sadly do not. This is the Mirage duology. This is an awesome YA fantasy science fiction duology that there was a little bit of a wait between books 1 and 2, but it was definitely worth it. Quick disclaimers before we start. I believe I had a review copy, a digital review copy of Mirage, though I honestly can't remember. And I definitely had a review copy of Court of Lions, but this is the Fairy Loot edition of Mirage, which is why it looks a little bit different to the actual one. I will put the covers of both up at some point. Regardless of where the books come from, all opinions are my own. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. I'm also going to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. I'm going to try not to focus too much on book 2 because I think that will spoil things for you. We are going to touch on it a little bit. So if you want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, click away now. As I say, this is a YA sci-fi fantasy duology that was published by Hodder and Stoughton in the UK. Mirage came out in August of 2018 and Court of Lions followed in August of 2020. I know that's not a huge gap, but especially when you factor in the quite large cover change between the two books, it definitely sets a bit of distance between them. But we don't judge books by their covers here. At least we try really hard not to. Samaya Dowd is a Seattle-based author. She's currently best known for writing this series. I haven't actually looked to see if she has anything coming up. Her degree is in English literature because that always interests me, and according to her website, she's also a teacher of comics and the history of Western fantasy, which is a pretty cool combo. So the listing for this book has it in fantasy, but they're also on spaceships quite often, so it's also in science fiction, which is why I've been mentioning it as both. But I don't make the rules, I just review the books. Our main character Amani's life is thrown into turmoil when she's taken away from her family by the brutal Vathek Empire. She's told she's going to be the body double for the cruel half-Vathek princess Maram. I am making my best guesses with these pronunciations, by the way. I've never heard them out loud. Maram is so hated by her people that she needs a body double because there's a really good chance she's just going to be killed. So we have a book where Amani struggles to navigate this brand new world she's been put in, and also dealing with the fact that she's becoming slightly interested in the princess's fiancé Idris. While I obviously can't go too far into the plot of book 2 without completely spoiling book 1 for you, suffice to say we're following the same characters in the same world. It's a follow-on story. This is a really compelling read. The premise of this book is a little bit tropey. And to be honest, Mirage is a little bit tropey. It has all the hallmarks of great YA fantasy, which I think is why the sci-fi element gets kind of shoved to the side at times. But if you are in the mood for some tropey writing, this book is a great shout. This duology is a great shout. Every time I've read this, I've really enjoyed the YA romance aspect of it, which isn't always my thing, so I think it's just well written. I also think that this book has so much else going on and so many other important issues raised that it kind of doesn't matter that it's tropey. There's so much more to it than that. Right at the start of the book, one of the first things that happens to Amani when she starts taking over from Maram is she gets her Dan, her ritual markings, removed. I don't think I need to go into how cultural erasure is a real genuine thing that happens, and this book explores that through a speculative lens. There are real issues at the core of this book that I think are really important to learn, and I really believe this book would be a great jumping off point for younger readers if you just had like a list of questions of what did you think about this, and here are some real world examples of when this happens. I know for a fact that me at 16 wasn't particularly aware of these issues. I wouldn't have called myself ignorant, but I don't think we ever call ourselves ignorant. This kind of book would have been a really good learning opportunity for me. I also want to mention that there is sapphic representation in the second book. I've mentioned in a couple of videos in the past that one of my pet peeves is when a character suddenly turns out to be gay in book 2. Now obviously I don't want to spoil anything for you, and I'm not going to, but this book, this duology, is one of the few series where that sort of happened and I felt pretty okay about it. I think that's in part because book 2 of the duology is the one that is much less tropey and is delving into a lot more of the feelings of these characters in a really big way. Whether you enjoy that aspect of the story and whether you enjoy the second book will entirely depend on how forgiving a mood you're in when you read it and how much you're willing to understand the nuances of some of these characters. It might even end up being something that puts you off the book, but for me it was definitely a pro, so I wanted to include it in this part of the video. Another thing that could be a con or a pro depending on your particular preference, these books aren't very long. Things happen very quickly in both of these books, and I mean everything from friendships building to big events happening to romance, it's all taking place in quite a short amount of time. I personally would rather have a book that worked really quickly and did some time jumps and made everything feel quite condensed, as opposed to a book that went through everything minute by minute and included way too much detail, but that's just me. I think maybe just another signature on each of the books would have given a bit more space for some of the elements to develop. I'm nitpicking, but there we go. And last thing to keep in mind, I vaguely mentioned it earlier, but if you are not on board with YA romance or romance in YA, then this isn't going to be for you. What are you doing here? Some people really don't get on with romance in YA, and that's absolutely fine, but then don't read a YA and expect to not find that romance. Just a few comparisons, other things to add to your TBR. I know I bring up Girls of Paper and Fire pretty much every time, but I actually think it's a really good series and you should definitely read it. More YA fantasy romance, Raw by Cora Carmack, is another video in Overbooked you will be able to watch. I also thought, just for some of that kind of fantasy meets sci-fi element, Cinder by Marissa Mayer, that whole series, what are they called? Lunar Chronicles. That's the one. They're good, silly fun. You might enjoy those. Should you read these books? I think together these make a phenomenal duology. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed Mirage on a reread and Court of Lions when I read it the first time. It's one of those things where reading the duology back to back really gives you a respect for how much these characters change and develop, and how the different relationships sort of blend and grow and all of that good stuff that you get in a story. Just, it's good storytelling. It is one of the few Fairy Loot books I've actually held on to, which you will know if you've watched my special books video. I really enjoy it and I want to reread it already. It's so good. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below with any other books that you have that blend sci-fi and fantasy together. I'd be really interested to know. While you're down there commenting, you can also follow me on all of my social media. That's linked below. You can subscribe because it makes me feel loved and appreciated. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Suffice to say, as always, regardless of where they come from, all opinions are my own, as in where the books come from, not my opinions. I have a few comparisons. I know I bring up Girls Made of Paper and Fire. It's just Girls of Paper and Fire, right? Yeah.